Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. Today's guest is I'd say a new friend of mine. We only met a few months ago, but a fast friend who I would say is, in many ways, in every level, the epitome of unstuck. And so a big Unstuck welcome to Mawi Asgedom. So good to have you on the podcast, my friend.
Happy to
Welcome.
be here, my brother. Happy to be here.
So Mawi is currently the CEO of Mawi Inc., which is an organization that sort of focus on unlocking human potential through evidence-based social and emotional learning. And prior to that, Maui had a company called Maui Learning that he sold to ACT. Maui went to Harvard, went to Northwestern. He gave his commencement speech at Harvard. Unbelievable story of success. Uh, but it didn't start that way. And in the time that we have together, I wanted to talk about two things with you. One is your life story, and I know you captured in this beautiful book that you wrote, maybe like 23 or something,
Yeah.
um, of Beatles and Angels, which I recommend everyone should read this book. It's a pretty powerful story. So I'd love to talk about your life story for a bit, and then we'll flip into just getting into the heart of how do you, based on your story, advice that you have about how not to get stuck and how to get unstuck based on some real tough times that you've had in your life. But let's start with the story of Maui, the kid.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I appreciate that. Thank you. And you mentioned Harvard. I still remember my freshman year at Harvard. There's this beautiful dining hall at Annenberg Hall there, and it's just this like it feels like Hogwarts or something like from Harry
yeah,
Potter, right? It's beautiful. And I thought to myself, I used to live in a refugee camp when I was a kid. I lived in a hut made of straw and mud. We had to boil water before we drank it every time because we were worried the bacteria would kill us. I never imagined that there was a place or anything like Harvard or Illinois or any things I'd come to know. My family was I was born in Ethiopia in a small tiny village called Adwala in the northern part in Tigray, where there's currently a terrible war again, unfortunately. And when I was born, there was already a war that was happening there, and we fled that war. My mom, I tell the story in Beatles and Angels, my book that you mentioned. She saved our lives, took us across the wilderness, got us to a refugee camp in Sudan, where we met my father, who'd had to flee earlier. And then from there, Clive, I
you
feel
get,
like
sorry, Maui, and at that point you're what? You're like two, three?
I was like three. I was like three. So, and I remember this refugee camp a lot more. Being in the camp, one of my jobs was to milk the goats. So I had to like hold the leg down. That's how we survived. That goat milk was so key. When they try to kick you in the face, so you had to hold the leg down sometimes, um, and uh, and the U.S. has this program that is actually in the news a lot because it's pretty political. Like it's how many refugees get to come out of refugee camps a year to the U.S. And some years it's like 20,000, some years it's 100,000. And Clyde, there's tens of millions of refugees that desperately want to come. How was I lucky enough to be selected to come out of that refugee camp where I surely would not be alive right now, and to come to this country where I had the opportunity to learn English, go to school, get a chance to go to Harvard. One of the things we take for granted, to build a company that I'm passionate about and to be an entrepreneur. What a gift. What a joy to pursue your dreams in business. Not people can't do that everywhere. People don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the support. They don't have the opportunity sometimes, right? And so it was life changing to be able to come here. And I talk to my kids about it all the time. I'll tell them stuff like, just by you going to school right now, you're doing something that your grandma never got a chance to do.
Sure.
Like all those
And by the
things.
way, I just want to mention to people who are listening, because you can't see Maui. The man has this most incredible infectious smile. And so you're talking about a 3-year-old having trekked across the north of Africa to Sudan. You're in a refugee camp. I mean, this is not like living life, right? And you're smiling. I find that interesting.
Yeah, it's I have a friend named Baratunde who big time comedian. He wrote a book called Better Than Crying. you know. And so sometimes you gotta look for that which gives you hope and joy in life, because there is so much pain. Even as I talk to you right now, there's a terrible war that's killed 600,000 people in the exact region where I was born. My cousins' lives are at risk, right? My mom's sisters, we haven't heard from them in forever. So the disconnect between the things we enjoy and are normal for us to experience here in the States and the intense, unimaginable suffering that some people go through around the world, it's very difficult to combine those things in one head, right? And uh, that's one of the things I've learned to do over time.
And there's a sense, like when I talk to you, and we were talking last night, it's like this sense that you don't take anything for granted, right? And it's like you got out of this place and you got given an opportunity and you don't squander an opportunity. You said something to me the other day where you said, like, your parents were like, the way out of anything is education, like in this intense sort of sense of responsibility you have.
Oh yeah,
Um,
in the refugee camp, my parents told us we may not have opportunity in America, but our dream is that you will get educated and you can make something of yourself, and you can help your family and help the country you go to, right? I'll tell you a story about just a lot of times people don't understand immigrants and refugees and kind of they think we're here to take that kind of stuff, which bothers me, Clive. And my father, the U.S. government paid for our plane ticket to come to this country, and although we were on welfare, my father paid them back.
that's
Like
incredible.
he paid back over a 10-year period. He paid back the entire amount of the tickets, and that was something I got from my parents. You always give more than you take. The book of Beatles and Angels, that was on the Oprah show. The whole idea behind that is my father and mother told me there's people in life that look like beetles. You want to step on them and crush them because they have no value, but they're actually angels sent by God to open up your heart and kind of help you become the kind of person God wants you to be. And that's coming from folks who've been marginalized, who are vulnerable, who are on the bottom of what you might call, the system, right? And so a lot of the hope that you see in me is what I've learned from other refugees and immigrants.
It's incredible. And so, by the way, I'm going to steal that. I want the one question I hadn't asked you up until now, which you just answered, which is why of Beatles and Angels. So I'm you're gonna have to sign a release because I'm gonna have to steal that story and use it.
Go for it, man. My father would be happy to hear that. Okay, sign out from heaven. So
So you get out of Harvard, you're age 22, 23, and you decide you're gonna write this book. And as I understand it, you ground it out like you 6 months you were out and published. Why did you want to write the book? What was driving it?
it's interesting. Back then, when I was a history major at Harvard, I had a tutorial with one of the most famous history professors in the world, just 15 of us, and he told us history is only written about people that matter. And growing up, I'd never seen one book that was written about any black refugees from any place, and I came to find out it didn't exist. So I
Wow.
said, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? I got the opportunity to go to Harvard. I got a history degree, and so I said, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna put this on the map. And you know what's so cool? After I wrote my book and became successful down at Oprah, there's a whole bunch now. It's like a whole bunch, like Long Walk to Water, all these other African books, and I literally had publishers tell me this, Clive. I had a publisher look me in the eye and say, people won't buy a book with a black family on the cover. I had
Seriously?
someone tell me that. Yeah, this is when I was first writing my book. Fortunately, this woman, Megan Tingley, incredible woman, she later signed the Twilight author, actually. That's my claim to fame in life. I was signed by the same lady. But she
Forward
she
into
always, right? She always
yeah.
had a vision. I feel like she always kind of broke the new thing. Like she was not afraid to try things. And she understood that different stories could be told. And she's not a publisher at Lil Brown, like like powerful, incredible woman. But she's the one who signed me to Lil Brown, got me a 6-figure book deal, which really opened up my world to go from being this low income kid that had never had more than like my family survived on less than $10,000 a month a year growing up, like for all 6 of us. To but Clive, you know what I was thinking about with our podcast, and I say this to my speaking audiences too. If I run into one of your listeners in the airport and they say, "Hey Maui, I heard you with Clive, and it was a good podcast. I'll shake their hand. I'll say thank you. But if they can tell me something they did as a result of our podcast, I won't say nice job. I'll buy them a sandwich at the airport.
Right.
I'll call it my airport rule, because our goal here is to inspire people to action. We all get stuck in different ways, and I'm hoping that something you and I talk about today, in addition to providing this overall general inspiration, which we're doing, we can lead into. And to that end,
Yeah.
I've prepared like three kind of scenarios where I've been stuck in my life. I'd love to share with your
I'd,
listeners, and
I'd
maybe
love
one of them will resonate with them. What do you think?
I love to go there because I know in our conversations, and I'm pretty certain where you're going to go. You've had some. I mean, on the surface, it's a success story, but along the way, you've had some pretty rough blows. And I'm not talking about the beginning. I'm talking about stuff once you got here. So let's go there. Let's start. What uh, probably the most powerful and most devastating thing was losing your brother, right?
It was, yeah. Like, it's hard. Some people, I don't know if folks who are listening right now, if they had a sibling that they looked up to, like that person was the closest thing to God on the planet. That's how I felt about my older brother, Twelde. We were attached to the hip in a refugee camp. Like 10 kids would try to beat us up. We didn't care. We'd take them all on. In the States, we learned English together. We learned sports like football. Never seen a football before. Never seen a basketball. We just did everything together. And I would pretty much sacrifice anything for my brother. He would do the same for me. And um, and actually, my sophomore year in high school, you gotta imagine we're living in Wheaton, a town outside of Chicago, in a Section 8 low income area, and and I'm at Wheaton North High School, and I finally had started to achieve some success academically. My freshman year, sophomore year, and my sophomore year teacher actually asked us to write a paper describing the person who was the most influential in your life. That was due before the holidays in December. I turned that in. I wrote all about my brother, about how he was over those holiday break. My brother took a trip to uh, Montana to visit somebody up there. Drunk driver came on the road at 3 a.m. and killed my brother. So the idea that my brother had survived like snakes, disease, wars, every kind of thing that could have killed you in the refugee camp, he comes over here, and then out of nowhere, this event, this illegal action that someone, even when we were hanging out yesterday, it's a reason that I don't drink much when I go out, because it's a very close thing to me. Like for that reason, it was devastating. The only way, a way for me to kind of help people understand what it was like would be, um, it's almost imagine that, like you and I live in the Chicago area. All of a sudden, imagine that Lake Michigan disappeared. You're like, what? Like that's where we all run across there. We see it every day. It kind of grounds us. It's part. You can't. It's hard to imagine Chicago without it. It's what just happened. It's kind of like COVID hits, right? Like that kind of huge event like that,
Part of your
and
life just gets ripped away.
it's just ripped away. Like you, something you thought was there, and I think psychologists have a term called disassociation, where you kind of like retreat, into. You know what kind of helped me? Because I was stuck, man. I was stuck. That's an existential stuck. You are blown out of the water. You're like you are just, you can't even think, right? And you know what I think? Because I've tried to think, like, how come I didn't give up at that time? Like, what was it? Because what ended up happening was I actually excelled the next 2 years
Right.
and got
And
the
this is
best
high
grade.
school, right? So you're a senior, junior, senior.
I'm a sophomore. I'm in my second year
Okay.
of high school, and I know that I have to do well academically at this point because my parents got no money from me at college. This happens with my brother. I'm now the oldest male. My father is legally blind. He's not working. My mom works minimum wage jobs. I feel the pressure to take care of my family. I feel the incredible loss of something so beautiful that I'll never get again, which is utterly devastating. And I was talking about this actually with one of the leading psychologists at the University of Pennsylvania about this concept of internal momentum. I think what saved me in that situation was before that happened, I had established like 6 or 7 really strong life giving habits. One of them was I'd kept a journal every single night. I have a stack of journals that's about a foot high just from high school, which allowed me to kind of gave me a way to kind of express the grief because my culture doesn't believe in counseling. So I still believe, that Africa, you're from South
Yeah.
Africa. We don't think about counseling the same way as people in this country. You just gotta like grit it through, right?
True.
I was on a cross country and track team. So that running and being out there and exercising and being on a team, and then having like this goal, I call it a most important goal of I've got to get the scholarship to help my family. I've got to do this. I was able to just kind of keep doing. Fortunately, the things I was doing before, I was already doing some things that were helpful, and I stuck to those things, and that got me through. So the point is, part of what helps us get unstuck is the things we do before we get stuck. Like the habits, the relationships, the friendships, the momentum we have. For me, being my faith was really strong. I'm a practicing Christian, a strong Christian, and that helped me. So it's kind of like I'd ask the viewers, if you were to get stuck next month, or the listeners, what habits, what momentum have you established on the positive side that can help you get through that terrible thing that could hit you, right? We don't think about that in advance.
And there's a thought I have for you is, as I hear you talking, it's like you have this sort of existential sort of thing happen. And there's a tendency for people to then try and solve this existential thing, which is so massive and unsolvable. And what I'm hearing you saying is take smaller things and move forward, because it's a momentum thing, no?
That's what I'm saying. Do the things that already made you who you are, stick with your values. And then I've come to discover what I call a two-year-old, Clive. It's going to sound hard for your listeners. I found you have to do that for a couple of years before you get, like, you don't solve it in a day. Like you're saying, there's no solution. I haven't seen my brother since that day. There's no solution there. But, and then beyond my wildest dreams, 2 years later, I get accepted to Harvard. They're paying my tuition. I get accepted to every college I applied to. Had I given up at that time and not done those small things, none of that would have happened. My life would have been completely different. But doing those small things, and it's like I always tell students, the most important time for you to do your best and do those little things is when you feel your worst. It's like when the big things falls apart, that's when you got to do the little things. Right. That's the point.
And then on a relative level, the little things are big things.
It's huge. It allows you to survive mentally until you keep going to that next day, right?
So as I think about that as a real lesson, it's like that's not the first, clearly, the biggest knock you've taken in your life. But you've had other adversities in terms of, your business, being a speaker. I mean, one of the things you mentioned to me, is, and I found it intriguing, and I've heard it before, but it was interesting to hear you talk about it, is out of success became pain.
Yeah.
And so you write this book, you go on Oprah. Oprah, as I understand it, someone told me Oprah said it was like one of the 20 best.
Yeah. She said it was one of her top 20 moments. It was a big honor. So
that's a huge deal. And so now all of a sudden you become a speaker and you're clearly great at it. Success comes. And you'd go, holy shit, you just won the lottery in life, my friend. But it wasn't. Yeah. In a sense, it wasn't all great, as I understand it.
That's exactly right. And that leads exactly to our second kind of point for your listeners to think about, which is after I graduated from Harvard, I wanted to be this speaker, this writer. And I got on the Oprah show. How amazing, right? I had this book deal with Lil Brown. How amazing. Big publisher, part of Time Warner Book Group. I had a national partnership with Time Warner, with Aramark. I had partnerships with Deloitte just to go speak. And one day, I didn't want to go to the next speech. I've been speaking over 100 times a year for years. Sometimes I was on 14, 15 planes a month. And I realized I had created, like my success actually became a prison of something I never wanted to do. I never wanted to be, and I thought I wanted it, but I didn't actually want it. And I think this is something professionals can relate to in many industries. They work so hard to do something that they thought they wanted. Maybe one of your listeners right now can relate to this. You work so hard for years to get this. You get there, you're like, this is what it is. I don't want to do this. And you know the conversation that really hit home for me, that terrified me? There was a speaker named Will Kine. God rest his soul. He unfortunately he's a good friend of mine. He passed away of cancer about, I think, 6 years ago. He was a close friend of mine, and he was the number one speaker in the country in the college market. He was on the cover of all the magazines. Yep. I'm talking, he's spoken in places like Alaska 10 times, right? And you know what he said to me? He said, Maui, if you don't get out as a speaker within 8 years, you do it the rest of your life. Because what happens is you haven't developed other skills and
And
you
you're
get used
trapped.
to making a certain income, and now you're in this golden prison.
Right.
That was the final straw, Clive, where I said, I'm stuck professionally. I'm making good money. I'm able to take care of my family. How do I get out of this? How do I get unstuck?
And not go backwards.
And not go backwards, right?
Right.
And not go backwards. Um, what helped me out a lot was a gentleman named Ken Perillo, used to be managing director of Deloitte for the Midwest. Was a mentor of mine. He sat me down. He said, Maui, sometimes people just need a break, man. And it's so simple, Clive, but that's the second point I'm being. He's just like, dude, you need a break, man. You need to stop. Type A people don't like taking breaks. We feel like we're going backwards. He's like, you just got to stop. And him and I talked about me going to Kellogg, which a lot of people wouldn't consider a break, like a 2-year full-time MBA. But I talked to him about it. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be with a lot of smart people. I'm not gonna go into it. I told him I don't care what grades I get. I'm still gonna open up. Maybe instead of doing 100 speeches, I'll do 10 speeches. And this is all about learning community. And that's what I did. I just took it from 100% to 10% for 2 years. You don't have to give. Very hard for me to do, but it ended up being the right thing. So I'd say to your listeners, sometimes you gotta take a break.
Right.
You gotta dial
So
it back.
when you took that break, you were putting gas back in the tank. It's interesting. It's like I get a lot of calls now because I'm old and washed up, and so somehow people think I got something. And it's like one of the most interesting calls I get is actually senior executives who um, leave their role, and the first sort of instinctive thing they have is I got to get back in.
I
Okay,
know,
and
right?
my first thing I go, why? Like,
Yeah,
first of all, you don't need the money. Let's just be honest,
yeah.
okay? So, why on earth would you want to get back in? And it's kind of like they're trapped in this thing, and they got it, and it's type A, and I'm an achiever, and I go, why don't you just step back and put gas in the tank? Like,
Kai, why do people not like to do that? There's something emotional about it, right? They feel like they're going backwards. They feel like they're not doing what they're supposed to do. There's something about us that feels like we're failing if we're not
right.
zooming the way we're used to.
Because the value system that you created for yourself and the scoreboard you create for yourself is putting points on the board the way you've always put points on the board. And so the way you at least this is my view, it's like, so you self evaluate based on that scoring system. And you forget that the bigger scoring system is, am I growing? As opposed to, am I playing the small game? And what you
I
did by
agree.
going back to your MBA was you were playing the bigger game, in my view, which is you were growing.
I agree with you. And it's hard to resist the ego that tells you, but you can get this, this, this. Like for example, last year I still do a little bit of speaking. Last year I did keynotes for McKinsey, BCG, Victoria's Secret, and when I post on my LinkedIn about I did this keynote at McKinsey, I get like all these people saying, "Oh, that's amazing." The ego tells you, "Oh, you got accolades. People think it's cool.
Right,
You got." But in my heart, I know that's not what I like to do. I like to work with kids, man. I'm a
right,
guy who likes to. I'm more psych. I'm not the guy who likes to. Even though I got high marks, it's very hard to resist that. It's
right.
very hard to resist that kind of thing, and that's what I hope people are getting from this conversation you and I have. You gotta like listen and be true to yourself at some point too.
Right. And I've found that sometimes there's a difference between what you're good at and what gives you juice. Like,
Oh, you nailed it. That's it.
and you, because you're a human,
Yeah.
what you're good at, you get feedback. And it's like, look at me, look at me. And you'd be lying if you didn't. Like, people should just be honest, go, it feels good. Okay. But it's
That's what
not
it is.
necessarily what gives you the juice, right? Which grows you.
Absolutely. And the funny part about what ended up happening is because part of what bothered me was I always wanted to build something bigger than myself. I never wanted to be about Maui and like me, which is even why in this conversation I didn't want to talk about my early life for so long and all that kind of stuff. Is everyone has a story. Everyone's story matters. We all could be on the podcast and learn from each other, right? So how can you think beyond yourself? How can you think to build? And the way I discovered to do that was while I was at Kellogg, I got an invitation to give a keynote at the biggest online high school in the in the world. They had 250,000 students a year in
Wow.
Florida. Their staff was thousands of students, And I went there and I keynoted, and I was blown away by the quality of their school. There's some really bad players in online ed. This school, Florida Virtual School, just has tremendous outcomes. Like their AP scores, for example, are higher than the national average, things like that, right? So in my old Maui that was only interested in speaking, I would have given the speech and left. Because I took this break, I was in a place where I connected with the CEO, developed a relationship. We ended up developing courses together, and I developed and over the next 9 years, I would go on to develop the number one online education company in the area of social emotional learning. There's kids right now where you and I are talking, even though I sold the company, that are logged in, taking the classes, growing, and that would have never happened if I was just out cutting through a forest or trying to get to the next thing. That stepping back got me into a business that was much more impactful, had a team. We helped so many more people, so much more fun, and much more lucrative, quite frankly, too. And so I do think so it's possible your listeners might not believe it, but sometimes when you take a break and you really listen to who you are and you're open and you go deeper, the outcomes can be 10x, 100x. I found what you were
What?
doing
And
before.
again, I feel compelled to tell people because I'm not showing the video. Once you started talking about kids and teaching, that big smile came back, right?
I know, right?
It's so what made you? Because there's another lesson that I think we should talk about in terms of when you sold the company. But talk for a second about what made. So you meet this guy, you give the speech there. What compelled you? What was the attraction to getting to teaching kids? I mean, I
Yeah,
can only
so
imagine because it's a beautiful
yeah.
concept.
Oh yeah, definitely. So for me, you know, it goes back to when I was in eighth grade and growing up. I really felt like I had nothing to offer the world. I didn't have any confidence. I felt like I was less than other people. I was the poor kid, the one of the few African American kids, and that was almost my story, Clive. If I didn't have a couple mentors and educators who helped me transform my mindset, I would have graduated high school thinking I had nothing to offer the world. But I saw that positive interventions where we teach our kids of all backgrounds that they have something to offer, that they have talents, that they can grow in incredible ways. And we teach them math and science, but we don't teach them about their inner worlds, about social emotional learning, things like. And for me, once I saw the power of that in my life, it was like I gotta give that to the world. I have to help the kids with this, and that was my fuel through all that time and the hard times professionally, like wanting to make a difference in those kids' lives. And that's why I even brought up to you. I'm pumped that right now, while you and I are talking, there's kids logged in benefiting too, because I built a scalable system that was bigger than one person.
That's amazing. We have to pull over the jeep because we got to talk about social emotional learning. Few riff a few lines on that because I think it's an important concept and I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, it's the idea in education. There's this kind of tension between we should only teach the kids math and reading. That's what education is. And um, and yet, what you find out is if a kid doesn't believe they can do math because their dad was bad at math or something, and their dad told them we're not a math family, then the kid internalized that, doesn't try when there's a hard math problem. And the research shows very convincingly that our mindsets. I'll tell you the biggest pillars in a school. If a student doesn't feel like they belong, they have no positive relationship. There's a direct correlation between achievement. If a student feels like they can't learn the materials, it's too hard, it's not meant for them, they don't achieve. If the student, so people thought it was all just about teaching 4+4. It's not all about teaching plus four. I'll give your listeners another way of thinking about it. In my own development as a CEO, the single most powerful thing my executive coach told me is coach told me, you're focused too much on the it, you will never unlock your potential until you focus on the us. Do you want to be an it CEO or an us CEO? What is that? That's not a math formula that I learned at Kellogg. That's a concept about my leadership and me valuing my team and understanding I'm too product oriented and not pouring to the team a lot. That one insight from my executive coach transformed my company's future. It led to me empowering my COO to run the whole company and empowering other members of my team. So we like to think that everything comes down to numbers and revenue and profits and all these kind of things that are mathematical. So much of life, as you know, is in culture, in mindset, in relationship. And The kids need to learn that too. We can't save that for like the 28-year-olds and 24-year-olds or the MBAs or the senior execs who get, a $2,000 a month executive coach. Our kids deserve to learn that at a young age because it matters for them.
Well, it matters and it impacts them through. There was a million years ago, someone gave me a copy of it, um, called Pygmalion in Management. There's an HBR article, and it's essentially this a similar concept, which is, and it's based on longitudinal data that says, in essence, if you feel something about an employee, whether you articulate it or not, they will pick it up, and they
Yeah.
will therefore perform to that expectation. And Pygmalion, because it premised on the whole concept of My Fair Lady, right? Where they did that experiment, that social
Study, yeah.
experiment. And I hear you talk about social emotional learning, and I go, obviously, it's so profoundly important for kids because it will shape them for the rest of their lives. But it doesn't stop at kids. It's humans, right? It's a human
It
construct.
is. And we found out the best way to help kids, by the way, is helping the educators and parents around them. So we had lots of trainings for adults. So I know you have kids, Clive. Every day when you talk to them on the phone, you get the opportunity to shape their social emotional learning. You can give messages on growth mindset. You can give messages on compassion, on all these values that drive them and help them. You can be the dad that tells your daughter or son, no, you have to get this outcome or I don't love you, which a lot of people do. Then your kid spends the next 30 years trying to get that outcome and then they're unhappy for what we talked about. Or you can be the person that says, hey, you're made uniquely and you have unique gifts and talents you're meant to bring to the world. And I'm gonna help you unlock that. And you have unique sunlight activities that bring you joy. And by the way, when I feel like you're not growing because you're scared, I'm gonna challenge you to grow. In our family, we don't back down. We do the hard thing that matters. These are all messages you can give as a parent. So what I learned is you can't just give the messages to the kids because the kids live in the world that parents and educators create. That's why when people complain about kids, I'm like, why are you crying about the kids? We create the world they live in.
You now the worst part of this is if my kids listen to this podcast, I'm going to take a like, you failed us.
Don't worry, we all fail our kids, man. We all muddle through parenting.
thank, thank, thank goodness, and because of the other person in our relationship, I have
I know,
two
right?
wonderful kids, luckily. Um, Maui, you build this business, Maui Learning. It scales. I mean, you get it to really substantial scale, and you sell the company. By all measure, a successful exit is like, you know, you won. And
Mhm.
I've heard you talk about it as it wasn't all a win, and there was some
Yeah,
pain in the process, and there's some more learning, I think, there because you talked about you had three things
yeah,
where people didn't like.
definitely. And I want to start by giving tremendous kudos to the folks that acquired us. ACT, just part of the reason I wanted to sell to them was they're good people. They have a real commitment to helping kids and educators. They're really serious about it. I know the CEO well, Janet Godwin. She's a phenomenal woman. And the reality is, anyone who sells a company who tells you that there was never one disagreement in the process is just a liar. Okay, it's a liar. It's like someone who says, "I never had one problem in my marriage." I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know what planet you come from. Okay, like everyone has ups and downs in any kind of relationship, right? And so I don't want to get into I don't want to get into like details or anything like that because again, like I said, I have a very positive relationship with ACT. But for me, the one moment when I felt stuck in trying to figure out whether I should go with them and kind of like that process, I got the most unexpected advice that a type A person does not want to hear. Okay. And that I called I called a good friend of mine because I felt stuck. And by the way, I encourage people to call their friends when they get stuck. Like just be honest and open and call your friends and be humble and tell them like you're stuck, like you're not doing well mentally, emotionally. You need help. And I've benefited from folks who've really helped me in tough situations. And she said, "Look, you're you're bringing so much judgment and emotion into things. Like you think the other people are the problem, you're the problem." And she said, "If you want a successful outcome, what you got to do is, I'm gonna tell you one thing. If you do this, you're gonna be fine. Every day when you wake up, I want you to pray for the people on the other side. Like literally pray for them. Like it's your mom or dad. Okay. Like, and I was like, Hell no, I ain't doing that. Okay. Like, why the hell am I going to do that? Like, I'm trying to get to the finish line here. That's not going to help me. And she said, you know what? Just trust me, do it. And her name, Ranjani, she ran a big management organization, works with all types of corporations, international. She actually taught at Northwestern for a while. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try it. Because when you're desperate, you try stuff, right? Bro, it was magical. It was unbelievable. Like maybe I was the problem. I didn't realize it. The deal closes, positive relationships, and it was very humbling to have to acknowledge the energy that I was bringing. Because we all in our own heads, we think we only bring positive energy. We think everything we're doing is right. And I was able to get a quantum leap in my thinking that I can still not explain by changing what I was doing emotionally and in my practice, which again shows the importance of social emotional learning. And we close the deal, have a wonderful relationship with them. So that's one thing I would say again is when you get stuck sometimes, hey, just take a step back, particularly if you have any adversarial kind of thing going on. And just honestly, even if you're not a spiritual, just pray for the other party, okay? And open up your day like that and see what happens. You might be surprised.
It's a counterintuitive but so logical thought. But there's we're coming up for time, but I'm thinking about this conversation is there's like two obvious through lines, and then there's the one that's the money. Like obviously you have a huge drive that comes out of your origin story, right? And there's a huge sort of humility that you have. But the thing that is like that strikes me when I talk to you is this openness always to learn. And a lot of people find success and they go, well, obviously I figured it out, so I'm now not learning, or I'm teaching now. I'll give, not I'll take. And you seem to have this gene in you that says, make yourself available to people who can help you think a different way. Am I reading it right? Like
You're right.
that's
And
my
I think
observation.
I love to learn. And I think you're reading that correctly. And what I'd want your listeners to know is probably what I'm saying is you can make incremental changes on your own. But for that quantum leap, some of the stuff I've talked about is some of that comes from relationship and learning from others and with others. It's very difficult, no matter what school you went to or all that, to just figure it all out yourself. You need the Will Keim to sit with you and explain to you from his crystallized knowledge of having done 5,000 speeches. You need Ranjani to talk to you. You need the Kemparello, and you have to be open to learning, right? And that's why I'm so excited to connect with you and the group we've connected with, as well as we're all learning from each other, right? And benefiting. But I'd say that's a big one. Something I talk to my kids about all the time is I don't care if you get something wrong. What I always care about is, do you know why you got it wrong?
Right.
Did you figure it out? Like, we gotta have that curiosity. Like, we're curious people. We gotta know what happened every time, or try to figure it out.
It's funny. It's like I used to, when I was in my corporate role, I'd run around the world and give speeches inside the company, and I used to have this line in my thing, which was like, and it's the best lines are based on truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I had this line which was, I've never had an original thought, so everything I'm going to share with you are other people's thinking. And it's true. Part of my deal is I'm hungry. I'm always hungry to meet people. That's why I was like, when Leon goes, you got to talk to this guy Mawi. He's amazing. It's like, bring it on. But there's if you make us, and part of why I do this podcast is like, I meet all these people like you, and I get this sort of this energy and this understanding that changes your perspective and makes me think differently and better and have better outcomes. It's like, I want to share this, because there's an instinct like, shit, I'm going to keep that to myself. It's like, what's the point, right? But there's a point if like you make yourself available to meet people and truly learn from them, you're gonna get out ahead for sure on every level, not just the material side, right?
I think so. I think it keeps things fun too. And then, like, just to tie the bow on an earlier thing with my brother too, I still remember one thing that somebody said to me. It's amazing. One sentence that someone shares with you, I think, can completely change your perspective. I said something like, I'll never have a positive relationship that close again. And then somebody challenged me and said, well, that's a really dumb way to live. Like you got to open yourself up. You never know. And that person was right. I have a different relationship with my wife. I have a different relationship with my kids, with you, with others. But that thought was lodged so deeply in my mind because of the pain that you need someone else to help you think differently. And you have to be open though to what other people say. And then just one thought, that's a personal application, right? In business, in personal, if we're open to each other, we can learn and grow. I truly believe that. And I think that's one of the best things you can do with your podcast is introduce people to diverse perspectives of all kinds of people that get people to think differently a little bit, maybe take some of those actions, right?
Well, I think it's a good place to stop because there's no doubt in my mind, thanks to you, we did that today. But listen, I so appreciate you making the time, and you understand that you will be coming back. We're going to be talking more. But listen, Mawi, always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. My recommendation to everyone is get his book of Beatles and Angels. And if you're lucky enough, you may meet the man in person. Thanks so much, my friend.
My pleasure. On the next one, I'm going to interview you so you people can hear your story. All right, brother? All right. Thank you.
All right, man. I'll see you. Thanks.
All right. Take care. Yep.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit ScreenDragon.com to see our software in action.